Good evening, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for being here. I'm really excited for this webinar. I've been waiting several weeks to get all of these amazing women together. This is NAVI's Teaching in the Hostel Classroom. For those of you that don't know me, I am Sharon Sorkin. I'm the Director of Community Engagement at NAVI. I'm also a mom of 2 middle schoolers that attend public school here in Ann Arbor, Michigan, and I'm also a practicing attorney. I'm going to take a moment to say that here in Michigan, in our Jewish community, we've had a bit of a scare today, and I know many people have reached out, and I appreciate that. The community is shaken but safe, and it's important to have conversations like this so that we can identify and fight back against extremism. As you all know, NAVI recently published a white paper, When the Classroom Turns Hostile, a strategic response to extremism and anti-Semitism in K-12 education. In it, we take the position that the problems we're seeing in K-12 education stem from a variety of sources, and that to truly address the problem, we need to take a multifaceted approach. Educators, like the ones we have here, and I'm sure many of you online, are a critical part of that multifaceted approach. But many educators are caught in a system that makes it hard to challenge the status quo. Some educators may even feel targeted when they ask questions or raise concerns. That's why I'm excited today to have these 3 amazing panelists. And so we'll get right in so that we can talk about some of their experiences, provide some practical tips, and hopefully empower all of you that are listening to be part of the solution. As a housekeeping note, I'm going to attempt to leave 10 minutes at the end to take questions. You can put things in the chat. I won't be monitoring it too closely during our discussion, but I will take a look at the end. And if there are follow-up questions, we'll provide contact information. So I'd like each of the panelists to take a couple of minutes each to introduce themselves, tell us who you are, your educational background, and what keeps you up at night about K-12 education. I'll start with you, Naomi, and we'll go to Limor and then Amy.
Hi, everyone. It's so nice to be here. My name is Naomi Rodriguez. I am the founder and president of One Nation of Educators, and I have been teaching mathematics for 22 years. I have a doctorate in education leadership from Drexel University, and I am the communications chair of the NEA Jewish Affairs Caucus. What keeps me up at night? Well, I think that, we've all been very afraid of what we've seen happening in K-12 education over the last couple of years. If you're here, you're probably familiar with it. I think my greatest concern is not just the fact that we are experiencing so much discrimination in schools, but the fact that we have limited means for dealing with it. We've done a lot of great work developing state and federal laws to address discrimination. The problem is that we have not developed robust systems of accountability to actually, make those laws do the work that we need them to do for us. Discrimination exists just as much today as it did 50 years ago, and that leaves children harmed. Today, the Office of Civil Rights and state human relations commissions take a very long time to address concerns. Parents wanting to go to court even, trying to find a civil rights lawyer that works in education, whether it's for anti-Semitism or something else, is very difficult. There are plenty of education lawyers comfortable dealing with 504 plan violations and IEPs. There are many civil rights lawyers comfortable working in employment law, but looking for civil rights lawyers who also are willing to work in a school-based setting is very, very difficult. So without that support, without the systems for accountability for schools, the harm continues. And I'd like to see that change, which is why I founded One Nation of Educators, which is an organization dedicated to pushing policy change for school accountability and education.
Thanks, Naomi. And Limor, we'll go over to you.
Thank you. I'm really honored to be with you women. The work you do is incredible. My name is Limor Geisler. I'm a Jewish Israeli-American high school math teacher. I have degrees in chemistry and engineering, and I've been teaching high school for 12 years. I'm a lifelong liberal, registered Democrat, and I have 2 related concerns about education. The first are the abysmal results that we're seeing in K-12. The most recent NAEP scores, the National Standardized Test, show only 35% of seniors were proficient in reading and 22% in math. A related issue from my perspective is that schools increasingly see their role as agents and sites of social change rather than instructions. So I've been in meetings where the administrator told us that our role as teachers is to dismantle white supremacy. So I don't know what that means exactly. It sounds like a huge job. And I'm out here just trying to teach algebra. So there's a de-emphasis on knowledge and skill acquisition and more attention to teaching kids to critically analyze the society at large and become agents for social change. And what worries me is that young teachers who've been educated in these radicalized environments in universities and schools of education, we have in the pipeline coming down into education. So in addition, teachers unions and school boards are being taken over by radicals. My own union was recently taken over by the Democratic Socialists of America. This is not a conspiracy theory. They're quite open about it. They talk about it openly and how they're doing it. And this is really important because unions have a big influence on what happens in education. But even more than that, they influence elected officials. They influence, everything from school boards to who gets elected president of the United States. So the increasing radicalization of unions is really concerning to me.
Thanks, Limor. And we'll get more into that, but I think it's a really important conversation. Amy, I'd love to have you introduce yourself. Tell us what keeps you up at night.
Hi, I'm Amy Leserman. I'm a 25-year career English and history teacher. I recently retired from public school to teach in private school. I am the chair of JUTLA, which is the Jewish Teachers of Los Angeles, deliberately named JUTLA because we find that it irritates the leadership of UTLA, which is the Teachers Union of Los Angeles, and they are susceptible to the same worries and anxieties that the rest of us have. What keeps me up at night is that DSA has also shaped through the Teachers Union, has shaped the electoral candidacy in Los Angeles, which shapes what happens in California, which leads the nation politically. And so the prospect of rebuilding in the union is daunting because many Jewish educators, due to the rampant anti-Semitism in United Teachers of Los Angeles, I will happily call them out and let them prove to me that I'm wrong, that the Jew hatred is so widespread and so rampant that many Jewish teachers leave the union. And since they are saving $1,000 a year and experience no consequences from leaving, there is no likelihood of them coming back and helping reshape the union. So the prospect of turning that situation around is what leaves me up at night.
Yeah. Well, we'll talk about what keeps us up at night, but we'll talk about some ways that we think we can make a difference and for the people here to make a difference, because we don't want to just talk about the doom and gloom. But I think it's really important to bring some things out. And I think for me, what I react to all of this is that I don't think any of us sent our kids to school or went into teaching thinking this was a political activity or that we'd be talking about political parties and the DSA and the capture of schools in this way. But I think it's sort of poignant to identify that this is a very political place in education today. And that's part of the multifaceted nature of it that we have to be sort of open-eyed about. So Limor, I wanted to start with you and dig a little bit more on kind of sharing what you're seeing as far as how extremism is showing up in schools.
So before I speak, I want to make a disclaimer. Everything I reference today is something that I've witnessed, but not necessarily in my current school or district. And I'm not speaking as a representative of any institution or any group. I'm only speaking for myself. So, and it's also very important to note that regional and local differences can be significant. And I work in an area that skews very far left. So I don't claim that this is happening in every school, but it is widespread. And also I could give hours of examples, unfortunately. So this is just a snapshot. So the places to look are curricula, of course, teacher trainings, student clubs, speakers that come into the school, messaging from schools and unions, and even the physical environment, posters, flags, etc. I'm going to give a couple of examples and then I'm going to zoom out. I was given a slideshow for Women's History Month, written by a teacher and authorized by administration, that all teachers were told to deliver to our high school homerooms. This presentation was sourced from the Zinn Education Project, more on them later, and featured a dozen leftist activists, all presented as heroines. And we were told to ask students which of these activists used violent tactics and what students thought about using violence to bring about social change. So there are several things to notice here in this anecdote. The first is that highlighting radical activists for Women's History Month is a choice. We could have been presenting physicians, artists, scientists, but instead we are consistently elevating radical activists and teaching students, frankly, that running around with a bullhorn and increasingly a Molotov cocktail is the height of human endeavor. Another thing to notice is the increasing radicalism. It's one thing for a social studies teacher to lead a discussion on violence and social movements. And it's another to have this discussion in homeroom led by all the teachers in the school. I'm a math teacher, implicitly justifying political violence. Another example, a student carved swastikas into my calculators. When I brought this to administrators, one of them said, "You know, Limor, the Holocaust wasn't as bad as US slavery." This is a grotesque, in my view, example of the oppressor-oppressed binary in schools. Jews and Israelis are positioned as white oppressors. And after October 7th, it became clear you could say anything about Jews and Israeli and nothing would be done. I know a public school teacher who regularly posts insane, hateful commentary online. Yesterday, or maybe it was last week, she posted that Jews literally eat babies, kill and eat babies. And this is defended by the district as her exercise of free speech. District offices of DEI are sources increasingly of radical propaganda. So one Office of Equity and Inclusion recently sent out a newsletter for Black History Month recommending teachers participate in multiple anti-Israel events for Black History Month and encourage teachers to ban the Anti-Defamation League. They regularly still in 2020, is it 6 now? Encourage the use of radical and frankly racist materials that claim that the written word and punctuality are somehow white coded. I have spent many hours in mandatory teacher trainings talking with other teachers about their guilt, that they feel they live on stolen land and they feel so much guilt about that, about police brutality, about toxic masculinity. We spend comparatively little time talking about pedagogy and what might actually help students learn. Schools invite speakers who endorse progressive causes like criminal justice reform, legalizing drug use. They denigrate capitalism. I have never myself seen a conservative invited to offer a different point of view. Teachers are increasingly using radical curricula from publishers like the Zinn Education Project, and unions are complicit in this. They pay a lot of money to promote these materials, and they platform the publishers offering trainings in union halls. My union hall hosted a Zinn training for their book, Teaching Palestine, that presented Israelis and Zionists as truly evil colonizers with no claim to indigeneity. They explicitly portrayed the US and Israel as uniquely evil in world history. And even math is not immune. Our district recently mandated a screening of a film called Count It Out. Check it out if you have time. This is being shown in districts all over the country, which posits that math education should be used to further progressive causes. So this brings me back to my initial comments. This film, Count It Out, to a soaring soundtrack, argues that evil actors are using math to dominate and oppress us. Now that may be true, but the solution, maybe not, maybe it's true, maybe it's not, but the solution that they're offering is not to improve the abysmal rates of true math literacy. Their solution is to offer students the impression of math literacy by teaching something called data analysis instead of math. This is a new trend in math education. And from what I can gather, it's essentially teaching kids to use spreadsheets. So if the data we supply the students to input into their spreadsheets confirms progressive biases, all the better. To me, this is a perfect example of how radicalism is failing our students. We're offering them a pre-digested set of progressive platitudes with a veneer of quantitative legitimacy, and we've just given up on the hard work of actually teaching them math. And so to me, this illustrates what's happening in schools.
Limor, first of all, I have to say, I love having teachers as panelists because you deliver this in such a compelling way. I felt like I was in a class learning about this, and that was amazing. I think you pointed out a couple things that I think is just really compelling. One is extremism shows up not only because of the content, but because it does not present multiple perspectives. Yes. So it presents that perspective as truth and does not allow for anybody else to challenge it, discuss other perspectives. And we're seeing that of different flavors, across certainly the regions that I've been working with parents and community members in. And I think you touched on that, some of this is really embedded coming from the union. And Amy, I know you've spent a lot of time working within your union and identifying extremism and anti-Semitism. I'd love to just hear a little bit about what you've seen, the kind of extremism, the kind of problems you're seeing in the union.
I first became involved with my union because I am at heart a bright-eyed, bushy-tailed optimist, a little bit starry-eyed, and that might even be the nature of teachers in general. I think a lot of us are optimists, and it's very helpful in our profession because there are some rough days for educators, and there are some rough kids who come from rough places in their lives. And the only reason you would come back is if you were an optimist. So I became involved many years ago, and occasionally something related to Israel would pop up and get voted down. And that was pretty typical. What began happening after October 7th was that the bigots got a hold of the mic and used that mic to help others find them and grew their numbers. And meanwhile, the Jewish and principled educators were leaving the union, not just over anti-Semitism, to be clear, for many reasons, to the point where thousands have left. And there was nobody in leadership who's willing to make a principled stand saying that these issues related to international policy have absolutely nothing to do with the needs and concerns and issues of teachers as union members. We need a contract. We need a contract. I can tell you in Los Angeles, we've been without a current contract since last June, and there's not one forthcoming. And there were recently issues having to do with our superintendent, and now we really don't have anybody at the helm even to talk to get that contract knocked out if we weren't busy focusing our union leadership on issues related to Israel and how bad that is, and Jews and how bad we are. Stuff could have gotten done, and it didn't get done. And not only that, it got to the point where the majority of the time in these meetings was also spent dealing with issues related to Israel and issues related to Jews. To an absurd degree, maybe 80 or 90% of that meeting was spent talking about issues completely unrelated to unions and contracts and negotiations. And when some of us organized trying to fight back on that, our numbers, frankly, were just not significant enough anymore. It does not mean that all is lost. We are still organizing and finding people within the union who are willing to find like-minded individuals and get involved. But it's going to be rough going, and it's probably going to be rough going for quite a while.
Yeah. And that's thank you for all the work you're doing. You touched on something I found really interesting, as you said, principled educators, right? So I think appealing to those educators, and I think there's probably more of them that are standing up right now, because it's kind of hard, as we said, to, stand up, ask questions in the environment we're in. there are a lot of teachers that went into teaching for the right reasons. They want to teach the kids math. They want to teach them truth, but the environment makes it really hard. If you're getting an assigned program to do in homeroom, you don't have the choice to say no. And if you do say no, it's going to cause a storm. And so you're not going to fight those battles every day. But I think it relates to how I kind of came into this. And I thought it just worth sharing that I first came into this because my district was captured and passed a ceasefire in Gaza resolution in early 2024. And my nonprofit, I named Focus on Education. And all I wanted the district to do was to focus on the thing that they were elected to do, which was to focus on education. And you guys have both touched on that. And I continue to believe that if we can find the people, the silent majority, whether it's in the union, whether it's the voters, whether it's other parents, that truly believe in core educational values, that I think we're going to make progress here. So Naomi, I'd love to hear sort of what your thinking is on extremism, radicalism in schools, what some of your observations are.
Yeah, well, in my work with One Nation of Educators and with the NEA Jewish Affairs Caucus, I've had the opportunity to talk to educators all across the country. And it's really concerning and consistent what I've heard. Frequent denial of Jewish identity, demonization, harassment, ostracizing Jewish teachers and students, political litmus tests, use of Jewish tropes. And I think a lot of this comes from the fact that many of us didn't realize that since the classrooms have become digital, everyone's inundated with so much information and so many different types of resources. And there really wasn't any proper vetting process for a lot of that stuff. Add to that fact that, Jews are only 2.4% of the population in the United States, 0.2% across the world. The majority of people don't really know anything at all about Jewish identity. So when they're seeing content pop up, across the board through Canvas learning management system or on Teachers Pay Teachers or News ELA, which is, popular across the country, and it's wrong, they have no idea. So that information spreads, to classrooms and students everywhere. And we may only hear about it when you have a large Jewish population in that community, because they're the only ones who can identify that there's something wrong with it and then speak out, right? The good news is that some of those organizations are taking proactive stances. I've communicated with an organization, News ELA, myself, and they're actively rewriting their content to make sure that it's accurate. But most teachers don't even know that some of the content they're sharing isn't really true. And it's had a great impact on the Jewish community, but we're not the only community it's impacted. Generally, as minorities, the smaller minority you are, the less likely it is that people will know anything about you or even reach out to you to ask you, to check your facts. So that's a pretty big issue. As we've seen these problems grow across the country, swastikas showing up, students being harassed, shunned, in some cases assaulted, national media really isn't paying any attention to it. You Google almost any city in the country and you'll pull up local news about Jewish students being harmed in school over and over and over again. But we're not getting any national attention because we're 2.4% of the population. Right. So, that it's really concerning and we need more eyes on this issue.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And that's why we're doing what we're doing here. And you guys are all standing up and, hopefully we can help empower more parents, more teachers to bring light to this. And you're right. We're a small minority. And sometimes I worry not only for our own communities where our kids are being targeted, where our teachers are being targeted, but the communities that have nobody to say that's wrong. And what the general American student is learning is not factual and is, creating discrimination. And that's very concerning. And that's why this is a systemic problem. It's not just a problem in the places where we have, say, Jewish students or other minorities. So I wanted to turn to you, Amy. We can talk just a little bit, all three of you really. How do you think this is impacting students? What have you seen maybe anecdotally or just generally? What do you think?
I see this as an enormous problem for all students, not just certainly certainly not just Jewish students. In Los Angeles, Jewish students should be about 19% of the public school population. And many are not being sent to public school, which means that there is essentially a tax on Jewish families for having to deal with teachers who are focusing on their personal rhetoric as opposed to academic content. But that is by no means the only population in Los Angeles that now prefers to send their children to private school, because our school-going population, our public school-going population in Los Angeles has plummeted by almost 50% in the last 15, 20 years. And that represents an enormous financial burden on families that is fundamentally unfair. To a large extent, I feel that this has to do with districts refusing to take responsibility where they should. And we now have laws in California that are compelling school districts to take more responsibility. We have Assembly Bill 715. And even though that law passed, it's now referred to as the anti-Semitism law, because it makes a teacher being anti-Semitic in the classroom against education code. And believe it or not, the teachers unions, including California, CTA, California Teachers Association, fought it tooth and nail, shockingly enough. And the grounds they're using to fight it are that the law now requires teachers to teach factual information. In other words, they can't just teach whatever they feel like teaching. It has to be content aligned, and it has to be truthful. But they're fighting it. The teachers unions are fighting it on the grounds that it's freedom of speech, which teachers don't have in a K-12 classroom. Right. It's freedom of speech, and teachers can't be held liable if they don't tell the truth. Yes, they can. And we're finding that little by little, we're making incremental gains, not just through Assembly Bill 715. And I shout out to Congressman Zuber in California, who made that happen. Not just through education code changes, but by parents and teachers willing to capture evidence from the classroom of what's going on and file appropriate legal complaints. Parents are really reluctant to do that.
Yes.
Parents' first priority is parents lose sleep over whatever makes their kids lose sleep. If their kids don't know any different than what's going on, then they don't know to tell their parents. And the parents don't always find me to find out how to file that official complaint. Yeah. It's really been a challenge. I see a question Mr. Bloomberg has asked, is Gavin Newsom helpful? Well, it was a mixed bag. He held off signing AB 715 until the very last minute. And he recently made a claim about Israel and, I don't want to misclaim, either Israel and apartheid or Israel and genocide, that shows that this is somebody who is really trying to find where the crowd is going to put its applause. And that is all that he is concerned about. Do I think that he necessarily has the backs of the Jewish citizens of California? No, I don't see any evidence of that. I want it to be different. I want there to be evidence otherwise. I really want the governor of my state, which is the fourth largest economy in the country, the fourth largest economy in the world. I really want that person to be ethically based in supporting all of his constituents, including the ones who happen to be Jewish.
Yeah. It's a great question.
I want you to show me.
Yeah. Naomi, I'm going to come over to you and ask you a little bit about how you think this is impacting students.
My biggest concern about the impact on students is the erosion of civic habits and intellectual responsibility, honestly. They are seeing so many adults just buy into propaganda and repeat things they're hearing and fail, perhaps because everybody's just inundated with so much information. It's hard to keep up, but it's really, really important that we research what we hear before we repeat it. And I can't tell you how many times it's happened. Somebody has told me, this organization does this thing, or our government does this thing. And within 2 minutes, I was able to pull up factual information that disputed those statements. Everyone watches their news channel, but I don't know that any of the news channels are really giving completely accurate information, right? Everybody's always skewed a little and it's or doesn't give the whole information. It's really important to question what we hear and do our research, right? As adults, because we're modeling that for our children, and our children will do what we do. So if we're not going through those processes and having those conversations with them, the kids are on TikTok and they see propaganda and they repeat it just like their parents. And that's my biggest fear. I think we need a lot of education around that issue.
Yeah, absolutely. And Limor, I'm going to give you a two-part question. I'm going to ask you a little bit about how you think this is impacting students, and then share a little bit about how you think it's impacting educators like yourself or others that you're seeing.
So it's complicated. Some students, especially boys, have reacted by moving further to the right. Boys especially have been demonized in these progressive spaces, and many of them are rebelling. And, I see that with the kids, but it's also, showing up on surveys. And unfortunately, many of them are moving so far to the right that they're embracing neo-Nazi ideologies. And I do think that this is a reaction to the, very intense progressivism that they've been force-fed in schools. For students of color, the data show that we're failing, many of them academically. We're not doing the hard work of making sure everybody learns real skills. And instead, what we're doing is we're telling some students that they're perpetual victims who can't succeed until the system is dismantled. And that's really the message that we're giving giving these kids. Some students are reacting to the valorization of oppression by leaning into mental health diagnoses and other markers of disability to position themselves on the right side of the oppressor-oppressed binary. And many students report, I see this in surveys, but I have, students telling me as well, they report feeling depressed and hopeless, in part because they're being taught that their society is irredeemably evil, and they feel a lot of guilt about that. In terms of Jewish students, for sure, Jewish students have been demonized, ostracized, picked on. Not much is done about that. And in addition, what Amy said reminded me that in my own school, I've talked to Israeli and Jewish parents who refuse to send their kids to my school because we have such a bad reputation in that community. So what's happening is that, the schools that parents are comfortable sending their kids to become more and more limited. And that's not just, that's not fair. They can't base it on, whether this school would be the best academically for them, because they have to write it off because of anti-Semitism. And that, that is
That's horrific. Yeah, I actually heard from a parent today who told me that they moved their children to a different school for reasons of anti-Semitism.
So in terms of teachers, the past few years have been enormously stressful. Teachers have to toe the line. Moderate and conservative voices are silenced. Teachers feel like it's not worth speaking up. I mean, behind closed doors, they can say things, but nobody dares speak up in meetings. I've been retaliated against. I've been threatened. I've been ostracized. I've had progressive teachers send me neo-Nazi propaganda, which speaks to what Naomi and Amy were talking about in terms of just the ignorance. I mean, they really believe, and this has to do with the long history of anti-Semitism, but they really believe that they're on the right side of history when they send me these horrible videos. And I've talked to other teachers who are similarly demoralized and isolated. It's very stressful, especially when, the teachers who are in the union, and I'm one of them, it is really difficult because there are people who hate us. I mean, I don't know how else to say it. Like, you go into these meetings and they are vitriolic. I mean, they are venomous. You know, they talk about Jews and Israelis with hatred in their voice, and it's very, very stressful. So, you know, it takes a toll, and I can understand why teachers drop out of the union. I can certainly understand why Jewish teachers aren't lining up to take leadership roles. It's difficult. It's difficult.
Yeah. Yeah, I empathize. And I think it's very hard in a place where you love your job, you love your students, and you also want to, you know, speak up. And I think what's interesting is the Jewish or Israeli identity is sort of being put up as the thing to dislike, but it's a category of anything, to your point, that's on a certain perceived political spectrum is being silenced. And so if anybody sort of Jewish or not asks a question, it will be coded as right wing, racist, and then it sort of silences the communication and the discussion and the debate that one would expect would happen in a teacher's lounge. I always thought the teachers were debating things and were having, you know, those kinds of conversations, and instead it sounds like it's very one-sided.
No, that's exactly right. And I want to give you an anecdote. I was in a teacher's training for math teachers. And I happened to be sitting at a table with, you know, many teachers of color, and we were talking about, you know, how to help students who were struggling. And I said, so in math education now, this is starting to change, but in math education now, the idea is that, you know, the thing to do is to have kids discover ideas on their own, kind of work holistically instead of direct instruction, which is kind of considered old fashioned. That's swinging back around now. But anyway, I was in this training and they were saying, you know, you don't want to use direct instruction. You want to do this kind of holistic exploratory work. And I raised my hand. I said, well, for students who've had significant experience of failure in math, you know, they're failing over and over and over again, it may help. My experience has been that it may help to do some direct instruction, because then they feel empowered, they feel successful. And all the teachers at the table agreed, you know, nodding their head, we agree with this. And the presenter said, well, that's a racist point of view. So, and there's a long, you know, history of why that's perceived in that way. But the point is that everything is so hyper politicized that you can't even discuss pedagogical methods without it turning into, you know, a political debate. It's not helping kids. None of this is helping kids. This is all, you know, and, you know, frankly, the people putting on this presentation, they weren't doing it for free. They, you know, they were hired, they were outside of the district, they were being hired to come in. They're getting paid a lot of money to do this training, and they're marketing themselves in a certain way, right? So all of these, you know, educational trainers and materials, they all market themselves as being, you know, equity focused. You know, we're going to help you, you know, improve equity in your district. So everything is just framed in this very political way, and we can't look clear-eyed at what might help and what doesn't help.
Yeah. And I think you touch on a point that I've been thinking about a lot, which is, and someone actually characterized this to me and it was really poignant, which was that equity has been weaponized. I think all of us here believe in equity. We believe in closing the academic achievement gap, helping the most underprivileged students develop skills. But if you say something like, maybe this approach would be better, instead of having an honest conversation about equity, you sort of get shut out of the conversation, and then it's like, and then you can be told you don't care about it. It's happened to me personally, and I think that's almost part of the extremism and the ideology, is that only one sort of frame is sort of permitted in the conversation, and it's easy to shut people out. So Amy, just because
I want to say one more thing, Sharon, just at that point, there's no feedback loop. Like the more students fail, the more it reinforces this idea that we need some kind of radical social upheaval. So it's not like, you know, you see all the failure and you think, well, what can we do to change this? It just reinforces their pride.
Really good point.
It's, you know,
it's a really, really good point. So in the interest of time, Amy, I'd love to hear a little bit about sort of how you think this is impacting educators, if you're comfortable sharing about how it's affected you personally. And then Naomi, I'd like to start talking about some solutions and what educators can actually do to push back. So Amy, I'll go to you and then to you, Naomi.
Well, I want to give a shout out to Naomi. who is active in the National Education Association's Jewish Affairs Caucus. I was vice president for a while, and it's a way for teachers to organize themselves on a national level around issues relating to Jewish identity and Israel. And it's an incredible tool. Those relationships I still treasure and will treasure all of my life, I think. The impact on teachers is I want to say comically catastrophic, because to be a teacher whose responsibility it is to tend to the emotional well-being of students, that is one of our responsibilities, and to then be the object of bullying and harassment is something else altogether. And we often find ourselves with no place to go. You know, the other teachers, the friends we might have had may have vanished into the woodwork for self-preservation. Our union representative might be a part of the loyal opposition. Our teachers union is not going to be of any help. And often we find that the institutions on the state level and the federal level will be of very little help. So we often find ourselves floundering and in a lot of pain. So we try to find one another, and we try to stick up for one another, and we try to have a sense of humor about it.
I think you guys are both connected to, there's been a real movement, and I think even a mapping of making sure that every state has a group, as you mentioned, Amy. And I think that's really important for the teachers that are on this call, that if they're not aware of their own Jewish caucus or other, caucuses, that they should go looking.
At the state level and on the national level, I know that the American Federation of Teachers has a Jewish culture group. Many cities have them. Los Angeles has JewTLA, but you may have to cast about and ask around to find who they are. I want to point out also, I want to state real quickly, the districts have a responsibility in this. I believe that the Los Angeles School District has a responsibility to publicize that political neutrality in the classroom is the law of the land. But they refuse to do that. They even refuse to publicize that they have a written policy on it.
Yeah. It's interesting that you point that out, because that's one of NAVI's big priorities over the course of this past year and going into this year is working with parents, working with teachers to, if there's an existing neutrality, controversial issues policy, making sure that it's known and enforced. And if there isn't one, working with communities to get one passed in their district. And it's really, really important. And so anyone listening here, go look at your board policies. I bet you'd never thought you'd be looking at your school board policies, but here we go. Go to your website, you look at the board policies, you'll find a section on instruction, and it will likely have something called controversial issues, but you won't find anything about neutrality. And it's a really important conversation to have, and maybe even with your teachers about how they approach difficult issues in the classroom. So Naomi, I want to turn to you. I know you've got a lot of really great ideas of how teachers can identify some of the issues and address them. So I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you. I'd like to talk about two things, some things that we can do to work towards fixing the problem, and also some strategies that you can use to help protect yourself if you end up becoming targeted for doing that work. So first of all, I'd like to share that, although I'm getting more and more involved by the day in my union, there was a period of time where I wasn't that involved, particularly because I was busy raising my children. If you're a teacher and you haven't been very involved in your union, that's okay. You can jump in right now, get involved, get to know your local union. I'm actually very fortunate in that I do not have some of the same things happening in my union that Limor and Amy have. It just happens to be, where I am. It seems there are pockets with major issues across the country. I'm not in one of them, so I'm very fortunate for that. my local union is very supportive, but getting involved, being a voice to speak up is the only way you're going to change your union. Become a building representative, join the negotiations committee, reach out to someone in your building who's already involved and ask how you can help. It's really not hard. I was a little nervous myself when I started, making that effort, but before I knew it, I'm going to the NEA Leadership Summit tomorrow. I'm going to be a NEA RA delegate, so I can have a say and a vote. Speaking of which, I believe one commenter asked about why we're letting these things happen in the NEA. And I'd like to explain that the NEA is a union that is member driven. We make all decisions democratically. So if we want to see change in the union, we need votes. And if you want to see change, you need to join us. So that's one way that you can help. Another strategy or way that you can support this change is reaching out to your district administrators before there's a problem in your district. Take a look at the curriculum in your school district and reach out in a positive, collaborative way. More often than not, a lot of administrators, although there's always bad apples, there's plenty of teachers and administrators who want to do the right thing. They just don't know anything about Jews. And since we do, we're really the only ones who can help spread that information. We're also the only ones who can help protect our Jewish students. So I really, truly believe that it is important to collaborate with your administration as much as, they will allow safely without causing yourself too much professional harm. And if that happens, if you start feeling weird, something's not right, maybe a different standard's being applied to you, something different is said to you than your colleagues or expected of you than your colleagues. So one strategy that you can use right away without, creating big waves is simply to start, it's going to seem obvious, but it's important and a lot of people don't do it, writing things down. If something's said to you in the hallway, you walk into your room and write it down on a notebook, a piece of paper, or on your cell phone, something that you own, not district property, not on district systems, so that you can maintain control of it. And you can look back to help your memory if things escalate so that you can share the pattern, right? Additionally, if you have those conversations, try to get them in writing. Send that follow-up email confirming what was said to you, or ask clarifying questions. However you feel comfortable, whatever you can get documented in an email is the best way to do it, because it moves it from being contemporaneous notes that are subject to somebody's interpretation to hard written fact that you can take to a lawyer if you ever need to one day. Another really important thing to do is know your timelines. Make that Office of Civil Rights complaint if you think you're being discriminated against. I had the opportunity to go to the Department of Education and Capitol Hill earlier in this year. And what I learned in that process was that a lot of people don't report what's happening at all. It might make the news, the local news. It might be spread on Instagram, but it never actually makes it to the Office of Civil Rights. Granted, they have a backlog, but they can't address it ever if they don't know about it. And for most state human relations commissions and for the Office of Civil Rights, FERPA violations, whatever it is you have to report, you need to do it within 180 days or it's too late. And I know countless numbers of people who went past the 180-day deadline, and then nothing could be done about it after that. So it's really, really important to know your deadlines, document everything. And then also when things get really bad and you're sending those emails, you got to call it what it is. You have to put the district on notice. Or your union on notice, or whoever it is that is targeting you. For example, if you feel like you're being discriminated against, you need to say, this is discrimination. If you feel like a hostile environment has been created around you, you need to say, this feels like a hostile environment. And the reason for that is because then whoever is causing harm to you can't deny knowing that they were causing harm to you. So that's another like really important thing to do when you're in that situation. And, you know, there are organizations out there like Deborah Project and, you know, Brandeis, you know, who are working to support Jewish educators. Finally, over the last year, we've had this amazing crop of organizations popping up across the country trying to organize Jewish educators, recognizing that we need that community to talk to each other and support each other. 50 States of JAG is one great organization. I'd be happy to connect you to if you ever want to reach out to me for that. Another great organization is Stop Hate in Schools. And I can't forget NAVI, because NAVI has done so much good work, has really supported me and other educators. And they're a great group to work with. I'm really happy to even be invited here. So
I'm honored to have you. And we couldn't do the work without you all, the educators, who are not only helping us understand the problem, but living it, and living it in a way that, you know, I have so much empathy for how hard it is to be doing your jobs, to be teaching math and dealing with these things around you and trying to be an agent for change. So really, thank you to all of you. So Naomi mentioned a couple of resources. We will be putting out a NAVI educator companion guide that goes alongside the white paper. So we'll send that out after this. And if you haven't yet read the white paper, we'll send out the whole thing. Or if you want to see the executive summary, we can send that. It is 60 pages, so it's okay if you don't want to spend all of your time reading it. We won't be offended. But would love to get you there. Amy, Limor, any other resources, and we won't be offended if it's not NAVI, that you would recommend teachers look to or go to in order to get support?
I just put, I don't know if it turns into a link, but I just put in, it doesn't turn into a link. The NEA Jewish Affairs Caucus put out a checklist to help people figure out if if what they're experiencing is authentic Jew hatred, because sometimes people feel funny about something and they're not really quite sure. I'm going to see if I can real quickly get a better link to it.
So if it's not able to be shared here, we can always send it out in the email that goes out after the webinar.
So I don't have a particular organization, but I want to second what Naomi said. It's very, very important. I didn't do this, and I wish that I had done this. It's very important to document everything that's happening. So keep a running tab on everything that's happening, send emails, but also, frankly, I mean, this is not something that I was comfortable doing initially, but take pictures, you know, take pictures, you know, whatever is legal to document it. Because, you know, if you talk to an attorney later, which I ended up doing, they want to see documentation. So that's really important. And I also want to say something else. You know, to change what's happening in our schools is not going to take that many people. So I've met, or, you know, and these are local groups where 2 committed parents were able to change policy in a large school district. So it doesn't take, you know, so sometimes we feel like, oh, we're, you know, there's not enough of us. It doesn't take a lot of people. You just need a committed group. And it has to be parents. You know, teachers are responsible for the union, but parents have to be the ones, unfortunately, speaking out in schools. Teachers really, that's just not our role. Like, we can't do that. So, you know, if there's something happening in your schools, connect with, it just takes a few parents and you can change the culture of even a very large school district. And as Naomi was saying, you look skeptical, Naomi. I've talked to people who've done it. So that's the only reason I'm saying it. But, you know, I heard Naomi say, you know, it's not too late to join the union. That's definitely true. The DSA that took over our local union, they took over with 25% of the vote. You know, it's not that everybody supports this, and the people, you know, who voted for them may not be aware of everything that they stand for. So it's not that, you know, I don't think that we're certainly in a minority as Jews, but I don't think that we're in a minority as moderates. I'll put myself in that category. And so, you know, all is not lost. You know, join the PTO, sign up to be a community representative on school board committees. That's really important. Run for school board or support moderate candidates. All of these things make a huge difference. and it's something that we can do. It's definitely not all is lost.
Thanks, Limor. And I'm glad you moved on to sort of parents, because we're running a little bit short on time. I knew we would, because you guys are saying so much important stuff. But parents really struggle with a couple of things. And I'm speaking really from my own experience. One is, how do we support the teachers like you all that are having these challenges? The other thing I struggle with a lot is, I am absolutely sure that 90% of my kids' teachers are either unaware or, just doing their job without realizing that some of these things are happening. I remember hearing, I think it was last year, that it was likely that materials coming in for Black Lives Matter month were going to have anti-Israel rhetoric. I was concerned about that, but I found it very difficult to go to the school and approach that topic, because it felt like it would come off as though I didn't want to celebrate Black lives during the month, which of course I did. And so, what do you recommend for how parents can maybe delicately talk to teachers that are probably good intentioned, but don't understand sort of the nature of the issue? And what else can parents do? Because Limor gave us some good advice. So I'll go to Amy. Amy's got her hand up. Yes, Amy?
Buy your teacher a cup of coffee and have a conversation. Buy him a cup of coffee, take a cookie, and say, something's been on my mind and I want to talk to you about it. That's number one. A friendly conversation is the best way to go, in my opinion. Something else I want to suggest to people, teachers and parents too, run for office.
Yeah.
Find out, you can check a website, it's called Run for Something. You do not have to adhere to their policies, to plug in an email address and find out what positions are available in your community. Run for something. And this is the best way to include your voice. Most of us don't want to attend those long meetings, but if we don't do it, somebody else is going to do it.
Yeah.
So it ought to be
great piece of advice. Naomi, anything else from you?
No, I that's exactly what I would have said. Have a conversation. It's very likely that the teacher just doesn't know. And you have an opportunity to educate them and maybe make some change, right? I did want to backtrack for a second, tell Limor, my skeptical look was not at you. I got a notification on my computer that confused me. And I also totally forgot that if you are a teacher in the NEA, Jewish or not, Jewish or ally, join the NEA Jewish Affairs Caucus. That'll keep you in the know about what's going on in the NEA. If you become a delegate, you can work with us. We can, pass MBIs or Constitution, bylaw, and standing rule amendments. That's the cool thing about a union, that we do have a voice. So joining us will give you that voice.
And I want to reference, it's funny that Debbie Paperman is in the chat saying that she works with the Alliance for Constructive Ethnic Studies. I was actually just trying to remember the name of that group. And the reason that that's significant is what also helps when you go to teachers, administrators, or districts is to offer solutions. So it's fine to complain. That's a really important piece of it, but to offer solutions and say, I do care about ethnic studies. I do care about everybody feeling heard and, having their their personhood and their ethnicity represented. Here's another option that doesn't demonize Jews. So, it's something like the Alliance for Constructive Ethnic Studies.
Great. Yep. And we can share their contact as well. We talk to them quite a bit. Someone asked if you can join as a retired member, and Amy said, absolutely yes. And one of the things I love about that question is that many teachers that are in the classroom and members are facing some risk when they're speaking up. And if you are retired, you can make your voice heard within the union and maybe protect yourself from some of the, concerns you might have if you're still in the classroom. So maybe we need an entire community of retired teachers that are like Amy, and it sounds like Carolyn, who want to get involved, and we would certainly support that. So we are just at the hour. I'm happy to take a couple of questions. We can go a little bit past the hour as long as you all are able to. Thank you, Carolyn. So if you have a specific question you'd like us to address now, drop it in the chat. I'm going to try to scroll through them while you guys are doing that, but please do just pop them in there. I see a question from Neil. Is DEI at the center of this? Do all roads lead to DEI? I think it's a great question. We could probably have a whole nother hour on that. And I think if you read the white paper, you will understand that NAVI's position is that it's an ideological capture. And I think DEI may be an expression of some of that ideology. Do we think that diversity, inclusion, equity are bad? No. Do we think the framework has potentially been captured by an ideology that is undermining Jewish and American values? It's possible. And I think in this politicized environment, that can be a difficult conversation to have, but we should continue to have honest conversations of what frameworks are supporting our students, our teachers, and our communities. I'm going to pop in and see if there are any other questions. You can advise of educational sources about Arab-Israeli conflict and history of Middle East that are not written by Jewish orgs to avoid claim of our own bias. I don't know if I have a good answer for that. I don't know if any of you have come across materials. The only thing I would say is I'm not sure there'd be any material that's truthful about Israel that wouldn't be accused of bias, whether it's written by a Jewish source or not. So, but I don't know if you've come across any that you find particularly compelling. I think there's a lot of good resources out there.
I'm gonna say that there's nothing wrong with having a bias and saying, yeah, there is a bias. There's a bias to all of the material everywhere. So read widely.
Yep. And one of the things I have said is, we at NAVI, obviously a North American Values Institute, we do have a choice of what values we instill in our children. And we firmly believe that American democratic values are the values that we should instill. So I guess we have a bias toward American democratic values. And I personally am okay with that bias. I love this question, Debbie. What do you tell non-parents teachers that they/we can do? I like the run for office. And I think just being involved. I don't know if you guys have other thoughts, but I think it takes an entire community. You don't necessarily have to have kids in the schools.
No. And you can still join committees. You can still participate, even if you're not a school board member. You can still participate in district committees and activities. You can go to meetings. I mean, you can speak up. You're a taxpayer, right? And so you are paying for this, educational behemoth. So you have a say as a community member, and the district will listen to you. You don't have to be a parent. If you're a taxpayer and a community member, then you also have a voice.
But also some other ways that you can, support us are by amplifying our voices, speaking to Jewish issues to anyone you know. Remember, we're 2.4% of the population, and it's hard to get people to hear us. So if you have a friend who's Jewish and or you're Jewish, but you're not a parent or a teacher, just keep talking, really. Like any opportunity you can to, challenge some of the narratives out there is really, really important.
Absolutely. I'm just so thrilled there are so many people here engaged. I'm so thrilled that the three of you were able to be here tonight. I know it was late for those of us on the East Coast, but I really, really appreciate. Are there any final words you'd like to share with everybody before we go?
Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you.
It's really an honor to be here.
Yeah, it's an honor to have you with us and for doing the work that you're doing. So thank you. Have a great evening. And I'm sure we'll be in touch and we'll share contact information as needed.
Good night.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Good night.